Drama today at the National Assembly as Niger Delta Development Commission NDDC's Interim Management Committee defends its budget, but lawmakers said they are not satisfied with their presentation. They have to come back another day. And the President Muhammadu Buhari has backed his Minister of State for Labor, Mr. Festus Keyamo, over the Special Public Works Program ordered by the Senate and the National Assembly to be stopped. The President says the minister can go ahead. Hello everyone and welcome to the program. This is Politics Today live on Channels Television. I'm Sean Kimaloe in Lagos. It was a matter a lot of Nigerians believe might end up with a need for legal clarity after the National Assembly and the Minister of State for Labor, Mr. Festus Keyamo, had a face-off about the approach in implementation of the Special Works Program of the federal government. It was meant to provide about 774,000 jobs for Nigerians. Despite the suspension of that scheme, the federal government says the program has kicked off across the different states of the federation. This was announced on the Twitter handle of the federal government, which clarified that the state selection committees have been inaugurated and commenced work, saying names and contact details of members of each state's committee are stated in the Special Public Works website. Earlier, sources in the presidency told Channels Television that President Muhammadu Buhari met with the Minister of State for Labor, Mr. Festus Keyamo, and has directed him to continue with the program, which is aimed at providing employment for over 770,000 Nigerians. Let's now check out some other political stories that we have for you on our political roundup. And when we come back, we look into the NDDC yet again. Issues of discrepancies have been raised when they went to defend their budget. That NDDC was meant to be an interventionist agency for the Niger Delta, but with a lot of allegations and counter-allegations of corruption. Tonight, we get views from a professor of law tonight on this matter. This is our political roundup.
The House of Representatives is asking President Muhammadu Buhari to direct the Ministry of Education to ensure that students in Unity schools participate in this year's WAEC examination. The House decision is coming on the heels of a pronouncement by the Minister of Education that no Nigerian school will participate in the senior secondary school certificate examinations earlier scheduled to hold from August the 3rd to September the 5th, 2020. The Social Democratic Party is criticizing the federal government over its insistence on retaining the current security chiefs in the face of what it describes as a deteriorating security situation across the country. The party also condemns the Ministry of Education for rescinding its earlier decision to allow students in exit classes to resume and take their final year examinations. The chairman of the SDP Forum on State Chairman, Mr. Oke Idawane, calls on President Muhammadu Buhari to change the security chiefs and also direct the reopening of schools for students who are in their exit classes in order to take their examinations. The Supreme Court has declared that virtual court proceedings are constitutional, delivering judgment on the suit filed by Attorneys General of Lagos and Ekiti States challenging the constitutionality of virtual court sittings. A 7-man panel of the Apex Court led by Justice Olabode Rose Vival held that virtual court sittings are presumed to be valid and have not been declared unconstitutional by anybody. The court held that the suit is predicated on speculations as the National Assembly is yet to amend the nation's constitution as regards virtual court sittings. The Supreme Court has dismissed the appeal filed by a governorship aspirant on the platform of the People's Democratic Party in Bayelsa State, Mr. Timi Alaibe, challenging the candidacy of Governor Doyo Diri as the party's candidate in the November 2019 governorship election. A 5-man panel of the Apex Court, led by Justice Olabode Rose Vival, unanimously dismissed the appeal on the ground that it is a pre-election matter. Lawyer to Mr. Alaibe, Ifedayo Dedikwe, withdrew the appeal after members of the panel drew his attention to the fact that the issues raised in the appeal were not about the primary election that produced Senator Doyo Diri, but about the internal affairs of the People's Democratic Party. The crisis rocking the All Progressives Congress in Ondo State is far from being resolved as it spreads to other parts of the Southwest. Representatives of the APC Youth Wing under the Youth Vanguard of Oyo State today staged a peaceful protest at the party secretariat at Okeado, Ibadan, calling on President Muhammadu Buhari to put an end to imposition of candidates and indirect primaries across the country. Citing instances of Edo State and the crisis that ensued as a result of imposing candidates on the members of the party, the youth leaders are appealing to the president to wade into the Ondo State crisis and ensure direct primaries.
Thank you so much, everyone, and let's get started. It appears the travails of the Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC, may be compounded considering what happened today at the National Assembly in the backdrop of days of allegations and counter-allegations over issues of corruption. Today, the NDDC could not defend its 2019 budget before the Senate and House of Representatives Joint Committee on the Niger Delta. The NDDC, led by its Managing Director, Professor Ponde, and Director of Projects, Dr. Cairo Ojugbo, could not successfully defend the Commission's budget as a joint committee pointed out discrepancies in the budget. In the documents presented by the MD, Professor Ponde said that the Commission received 305 billion naira for 2019 and spent 122 billion. However, it could not account for the balance of 183 billion naira. The Commission was expected to bring a balance of the 183 billion forward in the 2020 budget proposal, but the report submitted to the committee showed 40 billion. After the Chairman House Committee on Niger Delta queried the Managing Director of the Commission on the discrepancies in the 2019 budget report of the Commission, Professor Ponde quickly requested for the withdrawal of 2019 budget details in order to address the issue of discrepancies of 143 billion naira raised. The Commission, which is an interventionist agency meant to help drive the development in the Niger Delta region, has been locked in a series of controversies over issues of allegations of financial recklessness. Let's now speak with a professor of law and the chairman of the Presidential Committee Against Corruption, Professor Iche Sage. He joins us from his home in Lagos. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us tonight on the program. Let's take a look, broadly speaking now, from your standpoint, either officially as PACAC or as Professor Sage, how would you assess the situation with the NDDC, historically speaking, and of course, the events of the past few days?
Yes, I view the situation at the NDDC as it affects the Niger Delta as a whole as a major tragedy. That region, and I do come from that region, is one in which one can say that the people are suffering in the midst of plenty. They are living in a wretched life in the midst of plenty. They have no roads, no power, no water, none of the normal, excuse me, comforts associated with modern life. And God somehow supplied them with an abundance of natural resources, particularly the oil and gas. And it has always been the orientation of the governments of this country, whether under the British and then now under our own rule, that something should be done about the condition of the people of the Niger Delta. And of course, that's why the Willings Commission was set up during the colonial era. And now NDDC under Obasanjo set up early in this civilian era. The idea was to get funds subscribed by major operators in Niger Delta, including the government and the federal government itself, for special or specific investment for the development of that area. But what has happened since then, and it's getting worse, because at the beginning it was not so bad, is that the people who are appointed, because by the Niger NDDC Act, the Niger Deltans themselves occupy the major positions there. The chairman, managing director, executive director, administration and finance, director of operations and so on, operations, or the person in charge of the actual development work. All Niger Deltans. And the sad aspect of it is that with the fate of Niger Deltans in the hands of Niger Deltans, that region has suffered the worst setback it has ever experienced throughout its history. These Niger Deltan officials come there, simply collect all the money and divide it among themselves, pretend and deceive the country that they are engaged in some development work, whilst all they are doing is pilfering. And the level of pilfering is mind-blowing. We are talking of billions, 30 billion, 50 billion, 80 billion, 150 billion. It's as if money has become, I don't know what to call it, has become so cheap.
So, Professor, let me if you can summarize how you perceive the performance of the Niger Delta, the NDDC in the Niger Delta over the last few years. How would you rate it? Would you say it's been a success or a failure?
No, that's the point I'm making. I mean, you should be able to draw a conclusion from what I've said. I have said, for me, the saddest aspect is that it is Niger Deltans who are in charge of that area. And all they have done is to callously, very, very callously share the money which has been contributed by various institutions towards the development of Niger Delta amongst themselves. They have looted the funds. So there can be no development.
So let's look at Professor.
Development that we see now is just a pretense. They're just a token to support the pretense that anything is going on. So it's just the funds are just there for them to divide among themselves. What they do with that huge sum of money, I don't know.
So, I mean, because the president said that he needed to do a forensic audit of the NDDC over the last few years, according to the president, that no development has really come up since the inception and since when NDDC came up. But if you look at what has happened over the last few months, there are allegations and counter-allegations of contract scams and how monies have been recklessly spent at the NDDC. The NDDC and members of the National Assembly have been at loggerheads. What do you think is happening there?
What is happening is that we have people who are predators, who have simply descended on their own people and despoiled them of funds that are meant for their development. And obviously, there's going to be a clash because they would not be able to explain what they have done with the money. They cannot show projects and developments. The state of the Niger Delta remains the same. No power, no water, no roads, suffering and misery in the midst of plenty, whereas these people are simply filching away all these huge funds that ought to have really turned the Niger Delta into an Abuja type of area. If all the money had been spent in developing Niger Delta, we should be talking of Abuja B, let me put it that way, in the Niger Delta. But what do we see? Total underdevelopment, total misery, total wretchedness.
Prof,
so I don't see how the National Assembly can be comfortable with these people.
So let's take a break, Prof. But when we come back, under the President Buhari administration, he says that he wants to fight corruption. And we are hearing all of these allegations of corruption. When we come back from break, you will be telling us what the president needs to do to fix this problem especially the billions and billions of naira we are hearing that have been siphoned in the NDDC. Those are allegations, and we'll be hearing more from Professor Sage when we come back from this break, everyone. Join us again. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying with us. Let's get back to the conversation with Professor H.S. Sage, the chairman of the Presidential Committee Against Corruption, PACAC. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time tonight. Let me ask, I'm curious, though, how does it mean that the NDDC has so much powers in terms of how they spend the monies, such that at some point, it does look like there is no check and balance in the spending of the money, and at the end of the day, we hear about the contract scams which has happened over the years. Why do you think this has prevailed?
Yes, I think it's part of the sloppiness, particularly in these agencies that are not directly part of ministries. Because normally, you have your budget, it is approved by the National Assembly, you spend it in executing projects. At the end of the year, you have an auditor, and that auditor will audit it. The Auditor General will go through it, and then the National Assembly will see it as part of its oversight responsibilities. But obviously, this has not been happening because it has been an open sesame to these people year in, year out, where they're looting everything there, and nobody is saying anything. They do it, you get away with it, and then somebody will come, someone else will come, have his own turn, and get away with it, and the Niger Delta continues to settle in its rot, while these people are completely salvaging it.
Professor Sage,
So
if you look at
sloppiness.
If you look at what is happening over the last few days, when the Interim Management Committee went to the National Assembly, there seems to be a heated argument about how this money's allegations and counter-allegations. What do you think the president needs to do urgently over these allegations?
I think the first thing the president has to do is to clear all of them out of the place. All the people involved. It's, I don't know, the way some appointments are made. When some of these appointments were going to be made, I spoke in my private capacity because we were not consulted as PACAC, that one or two of them were not suitable, were not fit for the responsibilities they were about to be given, but they were still given. And now we are seeing the results. The whole place is the total mess, accusations and counter-accusations, and they are talking of billions. It's mind-boggling, very frightening. And what worries me is that the rest of the country will say, well, we've had sympathy for your condition, we made provisions for you, but your own people have gone there and despoiled everything. It gives a very bad name to the Niger Delta and its peoples. So I would suggest that everybody there should be cleared out, and that the president should now appoint a new set of people very quickly in a very temporary, under temporary conditions, so that a permanent board and management can be established in the place, who would then be monitored. I do not see why auditing, forensic auditing cannot take place when you have a regular board. I don't see the point of having this temporary board, which is an anomaly, which has proved to be such a disaster. So my view is that everybody should be removed right now, clear the place, sweep it clean,
All right.
start
Prof,
afresh with a new set of people.
Prof, just in 20 seconds, if you may, does this put a dent on the Buhari administration's fight against corruption?
Not necessarily, because one, this is not a new thing. This has been going on. It's just that it's come to a head. And any fight against corruption will be affected in this manner, in the sense that whilst you are fighting against corruption, there will still be corrupt people who would want to challenge that fight. And as long as you deal with them, when you come across them, it's not a dent. As long as you do not accept what is happening, you do not encourage it, you do not see it and
All right.
allow it to continue, it cannot be a dent. Anyone doing what these people are doing ought to be taking a risk for
All
which
right.
they should pay heavily.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the government will ensure that that happens.
Professor H.S. Sage, Chairman of the Presidential Committee Against Corruption, PACAC. Thank you so much, Prof, for talking to us tonight.
You are most welcome.
Thank you. Yet another mind-boggling situation in terms of corruption issue is what we're going to quickly get some legal view on. The federal government has told a British court that it has uncovered previously unknown payments to the daughter of a Nigerian official in its latest attempt to overturn an arbitration award against it worth close to $10 billion US. Process and Industrial Development, P&ID, a firm set up to carry out a gas project in Nigeria, won a $6.6 billion US arbitration award after the 2010 deal collapsed. The award has been accruing interest since 2013 and is now worth nearly $10 billion. Nigeria is seeking permission in the English court to appeal the award granted in 2017, despite having missed the 28-day appeal deadline. It says new information came to light only in late 2019. Let me now get the view of a senior advocate of Nigeria, Mr. Yemi Kandi Johnson, who joins us now. It's good to see you again, sir. Give us your view on what is happening here. Nigeria largely defrauded. Yes, it's Nigeria money that is what we are talking about. With your knowledge about international fraud and criminality, what do you think is happening here?
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. The P&ID case is a case that arises, as you know, from an arbitration award given against the government of Nigeria for a sum which is impossible to believe upon a contract which, by common understanding, was non-existent and was in its foundation fraudulent. And that is a problem for Nigeria because an award has been rendered against the country which may be impossible to pay and which has exposed a scandal in the administration of law and justice in Nigeria. As you know, an arbitration award is the product of a contract, and the award itself has no enforcement unless a court recognizes that the party's contract has validity on a number of levels. In a contract like this, what has happened is that, and this is quite common, it is recognized as a common vehicle of fraud and money laundering, and this has happened in a number of cases across the world, where arbitrations, which are contractual remedies, are invoked for the purposes of defrauding particular individuals. I think that you will find that in a number of cases concerning the Nigerian government, many of these cases have been put, and this is not the only case you will find, have been put into the process of arbitration for the purpose of perfecting a fraudulent and money laundering scheme. Now, why is this important? Because no court in the world is going to enforce a contract or the product of a contract that has been founded on fraud, criminality, bribery and corruption, or money laundering. The case being presented in London by the Nigerian government is that the foundational contract upon which this arbitration award was given was fraudulent. It was tainted by bribery and corruption. It was an instrument of money laundering. And they're saying that such a contract cannot be enforced under international public policy.
So, sir, yeah,
yes,
senior advocate. Yeah. So, apologies. Let me, because it bothers my mind, and the big question is how vulnerable is Nigeria here, and what are the chances of the nation in overturning this situation? Is it slim?
Well, on its face, an arbitration award is valid. This one is valid. This case went to a hearing before a competent tribunal, and they found that there was an award of damages that could have been made against the Nigerian government. Now, there is some contest as to whether the case was presented to its best possible effect. And again, I wish to make the point that in many of the cases involving the Nigerian government, the representation and the presentation for the government is fundamentally flawed, is presented without support by government counsel, and is very often calculated to explode, to implode, and to allow the liability to third parties who are in complicity with government officials to escape with the money. So this is a problem. If you're given the case to defend the Nigerian government or a government with a similar reputation, the first thing you have to wonder about yourself is whether it's a valid claim, whether you're being unwittingly lured into participating in a scheme to defraud the government. Now, that is one thing that is being raised in this case right now. That, of course, as I said earlier on, that the fundamentals of the case were fraudulent.
All right.
It was based on bribery and corruption. That is the fundamental of it. So the vulnerability of Nigerian government depends on their ability to prove to an international tribunal, in this case, the court in London,
All right.
that in fact this was a fraudulent case.
Thank you so much for those insights, and we'll keep our fingers crossed, I guess, Mr. Yemi Kande Johnson, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. Indeed, it's a pleasure hearing these legal thoughts and opinion on this matter. Thank you so much indeed for talking to us tonight.
Thank you.
That's our show for tonight, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye for now.